Welcome to Lit Bashing, where today we're going to be rules bashing and lore bashing how to build fluffy armies around the primarily Loyalist legions, and how easy it is to keep narrative sense while also making the most of the legion's special rules, and whether or not the result of that is likely to be competitive at all. Which sounds complicated, so basically rules good, rules fluffy, allies who. Starting with the Loyalists, though traitors of course will follow very shortly. Boom, explosion. Disclaimer to start. Explicitly in the lore and the rules, every legion is available as a loyalist or a traitor force. Although the legions generally split down the middle with 9 for the Lore Master, 9 for the Emperor, and 2 for the magical unicorn people of Equestria, every legion had loyalists and traitors at some point in the lore. Even the World Eaters, who did their absolute best to execute every single loyalist in their ranks, still let some pass through. Heck, Endred Har, who recently was released in 28mm scale, can't cover up all of his past. So I'm splitting these videos into the 9 and 9 for ease of watching and flavour. Second disclaimer, I've got some water with me today because I completely destroyed my voice the other night watching an up-and-coming young artist named Bruce Springsteen. So, if he's coming near you, go and see him because he's amazing. Anyway, for assessing potential allies, I'll be using the Allies in the Age of Darkness table as a very loose starter for ideas to mix and match. But note, this is only a snapshot of a very specific moment in the heresy. Take, for example, the World Eaters, who, at the start of the heresy, were sharing battles and bunk beds with the Emperor's children, and hating the book-reading guts of the Word-bearers. And by the end of the heresy, they couldn't stand to be in the same room as pretty boy Fulgrim and his team, but were now BFFs forever with Argel Tal and going on road trips through the warp together. The Allies matrix puts both as neutral, which doesn't represent either of the extremes they went through. A lot changed during the heresy, and if you can justify it in the fluff, go for it. You can absolutely mix any and all. Run Traitor Wolves and Loyalist Death Guard, and don't let anyone tell you that your Imperial Fists allied with World Eaters and Alva Legions is power gaming. I mean, it is power gaming, but don't let anyone else tell you that. So let's start at the beginning, because it's a very good place to start. The first legion are the Dark Angels. Being the first legion, they were very much the example of what would later be called Codex compliance. Though note, that would be a very anachronistic thing to say in this video, as the Codex didn't exist yet. And also weird because they're explicitly not Codex compliant in the 41st millennium. But certainly before all their Deathwing and Raven Ring and Watchers in the Dark nonsense, the at the time black and red goody two-shoes boys were the example of a legion, having an extensive and varied armoury. They didn't focus on ranged combat like the Fists, or up and close like the Eaters. They didn't focus on siege like the Death Guard or Vanguard like the Scars. They did a bit of everything. Indeed, their little blurb in the book says there was at least one host of order dedicated to each discipline of war. And their legion rule reflects this well. The Dark Angels reward variety with tactical flexibility. You don't want single-type strike formations. You want big old demi-companies. An armoured company gets 0 bonuses from the Dark Angels rule. But the battle tanks in a demi-company with a tactical core and dreadnought support would get nimble if you wanted them to. Alternatively, at the start of the battle, if you don't think nimble is going to be very effective against your opponent's list, give your infantry phosphex bombs and make them implacable. These are 2 very good options with very good rules. The third, giving cavalry outflank, is not. You can do that anyway just by taking a Skyhunter phalanx without needing a variety tax. But if you take a Dreadnought Talon in each formation, which you should because they're great, and also take some infantry and vehicles, then it gives you flexibility on how to use those. You sacrifice the bonus of either the vehicles or the infantry for the other, and resign yourself never to get buffs on your Dreadnoughts, but tactical flexibility is the name of the game here. It's also one of the very few rules that gives vehicles any kind of bonus. Is it more flexible than just taking a mix of legions, each dedicated to a particular type? Competitively, probably not. But for a fluffy list that also has a little bit of tactical oomph, using Dark Angels as the core of your army isn't the worst choice. It's not the best, but far from the worst, and their Legion rule is very fluffy and suits them well. So a Dark Angels core, in order to be effective, would be a couple of demi-companies or garrisons with at least 1 detachment of dreadnoughts in each, and a mix of infantry and vehicles. What you don't want, because it does nothing, are Skyhunter Phalanx and Armoured Companies in Dark Angel's livery. If you want Vanguard and vehicle units in a Dark Angel's army, spread them over several demi-companies. In the fluff, most legions played nice with the Dark Angels. They weren't big on the bloodier legions, so be prepared to come up with a lot of fluff to excuse it. As such, I can't recommend Space Wolves, Night Lords or World Eaters, which is a shame because a maxed out all jet bikes World Eaters Vanguard would complement a varied Dark Angels demi-company quite nicely. But if you wanted Vanguard, instead consider a White Scars detachment to make use of their nicer jink, or a minimum-sized Emperor's Children detachment for the free Seize the Initiative you get out of it. There were plenty of Loyalist Emperor's Children. Just make sure to paint their shoulder pads white instead of black or purple, and bonus points for modelling Assault Harvits or Ancient Rylanor to fly the Imperial banner. Another option, and keeping with the more traditionally Loyalist legions, is going double Angels, and using Blood Angel jet bikes and Outriders and a Phalanx for your close combats. Alternatively, take some Loyalist Death Guard. An armoured company would work well, as early in the Heresy at least, the Death Guard armoured companies were fiercely Loyalist. They were the first target on Isstvan 3. So if you want to squeeze in a few more tanks, paint them off-white and green, and you get to make some tactical terrain dangerous. Fluff-wise, the Dark Angels BFFs were the Salamanders, something that will come up a few times because everybody loved them, the little Mary Sues. Anyway, their guaranteed implacable and morale boosts are better than the optional morale that the Dark Angels offer. So if you're thinking more likely to opt for the nimble vehicle bonus, some implacable units of any type might be fun. In general, the Dark Angels all-comer style of play matches their fluff, and opens up some useful allies. As with most all-comers type armies, they may lose out strictly to the more min-maxy style that others offer, but rest assured you can create a very fun, very fluffy, very consistent with the lore list using the Sons of the Lion. Good start. Our next Loyalist main are the White Scars. If I, a staunch heretic, were to paint up a Loyalist army, it would probably be these guys. Because they're fun. You're essentially locking yourself into aerial assaults and Skyhunter phalanxes, as they're the only formations that really benefit from the army rule, which might seem like a bad thing, as neither is particularly competitive in themselves. And that is true, but you don't go White Scars to be competitive. You play White Scars to zip around the board, being unable to be hit, while showing off to the world how well you can paint white. Speaking of which, if you're in Warhammer World, check out the Temporary Legions display in the game hall for Storm of Chogris' amazing White Scars army he took to Warhammer World in April. So, with extra jink and making lots of saves, that leaves an obvious hole in the army. Infantry. You need bodies on the board to play this game, and a Tactical Marine doesn't have any jink, so he's not going to be good painted white. So who should you take as an ally? Well, the White Scars played especially well with the Salamanders, because everyone did, and the Sons of Horus, or more accurately, the Lunar Wolves. The Sons of Horus who rejected the colours of the War Master and returned to their livery from before his return. And painting up a demi-company of Lunar Wolves in their off-white would look beautiful alongside a pure white and red White Scars. Both the Salamanders and Sons of Horus Legion traits work especially well on the detachment the White Scars don't. Lunar Wolves would be amazing close-range firepower to support the zippy skimmers, and Salamander's extra morale and ability to stay put on objectives complements the movers wonderfully. Because the Emperor was and is a big baby and was scared of Jakatai Khan for silly prophecy-related reasons, the White Scars weren't trusted by a lot of the Loyalists. Or the traitors for that matter, so there's plenty of flexibility for putting anyone else with them if you like the schemes. Iron Warriors, Imperial Fists and Night Lords were their least favourites, but with the possible exception of the Fist's nice infantry bonus, none of those are particularly worth considering over the cannon allies. Alternatively, pairing the silly outflank of a Skyhunter phalanx with the infiltrate shenanigans from an Alpha Legion formation might be a fun way to represent their joint untrustworthiness and be a little bit more competitive. So again, 2 for 2 now in terms of being very suited to their rule and their in-fluff allies complementing their playstyle. Also 2 for 2 in some fun, not terrible, albeit neither the most competitive, builds. Can this last? Unfortunately not, as now we have the Space Wolves, who at the time of writing have the worst Legion trait in this YouTuber's humble opinion. Basically they only exist to counter Alpha Legion and Skyhunter Phalanx, and the latter is just not worth countering. Arguably, having a dedicated anti-Alpha Legion army is useful in a game where the Alpha Legion are the best Legion bar pretty much none, but you get no other bonus except making your opponent's infiltrate a little bit worse. If you know you're going to be facing Alpha Legion a lot, which you probably are going to if you're playing competitively, this would be a good idea. if not for the fact that by taking Space Wolves to a competitive environment, you're sacrificing taking Alpha Legion yourself to a competitive environment, which is probably better against other Alpha Legion than Space Wolves are. Fluff-wise, their trait makes sense. Their instincts and enhanced senses prevent opponents sneaking up on them, but for a Legion who in the fluff are so vicious and bloodthirsty, it's a waste to see them combat so poorly against World Eaters who should be their equals. Unit-wise, to keep a fluffy Space Wolf army would have a lot of shock assaults and deep striking terminators getting into close combat. Taking out flankers yourself in the form of a phalanx might extend the reach of your nope zone, but not by much. It seems really, really wrong to suggest allying close combat specialists with wolves, so I'm not going to. Instead, Imperial Fists played nicely with Rust during the Heresy, so building up the bulk of your force with yellow shooters would work well. Or Salamanders, of course. Just don't ally them with the Thousand Suns without every neckbeard worth his salt rightfully scoffing at your blatant disregard for the law. Much less competitive, much less fun to play with and against, and with less obvious fluff comp builds. Oh well, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Except now it's 3 out of 4, because the Imperial Fists are good. Like, really good. Like, good enough to be allied with Alpha Legion at comp events good. You want siege defense. Lots of infantry with all the best guns you have. Read missile launchers. You want them to get an objective and stay there. First fire gang, rise up. It's what you want on the table to win the game. It's what the Legion trait is good at helping. It's what the Imperial Fists do. It's what they do. And yellow looks amazing on the table. Really, you can tell why these are the Loyalist poster boys of the game. So who do you want to support them? Well, they don't really need it. A pure Fists army wouldn't be a bad shout at all. Any other Legion you take is just taking up points that could be spent on more Imperial Fists infantry. But if you want to take a range of different types and units, fully according to fluff, you could take some Blood Angels for close combat. Just use all the Assault Marines you got as a byproduct of buying Imperial Fist missile launchers and paint them red, put them in Thunderhawks, and run a Blood Angels aerial assault alongside. Alternatively, if you want more tanks for some reason, Iron Hands play mostly nice with the Fists and give good armour. Or the Star Wars Salamanders. Great fluff to trait ratio, a very competitive choice, top of the list so far. And now we cross the halfway point with the Blood Angels themselves, and this is basically just going to be everything I said about the Fists, but in reverse. Blood Angels like getting into combat, winning that combat, moving into another combat, and winning that one too. They're arguably the only Legion that really makes use of the aerial assault and drop pod assault formations. Get as many CAF plus units as possible into a formation and give them a method to get close fast. Thunderhawks are large assault transports, and Assault Marines can disembark whilst they're flying, which is great. But also, drop pods and deep strike terminators are fun, because whilst you can't usually assault out of a drop pod or a deep strike, you can deep strike an HQ in a drop pod detachment with a palisade shield to cover his unit, and then use his tactical command ability to give another disembarking unit of, let's say, Leviathan Dreadnoughts in drop pods the charge order instead. Bam. Deep striking Leviathans in a turn 1 assault. That was whoever you're attacking, heads literally exploding. Support with your favourite flavour of ranged shooting marine, say Imperial Fists, and boom, fun times for all. Fluffy to the max, cannon allies, and a good competitive choice. They join their yellow brothers at the top of the list. Iron Hands are special, in that they are the only Loyalist Legion, except Salamanders, who love everybody, the big gays, who canon will fight battle brothers with Emperor's children. Basically, up until the very moment Fulgrim decided to chop off his best friend's head, which kind of would sour the relationship, the Emperor's children and Iron Hands were skipping through fields together, and the Emperor's children were braiding daisy chains into the Iron Hands' hair, and the Iron Hands were pretending not to like it while secretly feeling really pretty. As such, you can take a min-sized, Loyalist Emperor's Children phalanx or garrison, and get a guaranteed seize the initiative in a turn of your choosing, and it will be entirely in keeping with the fluff, and you can scoff your sweatiest scoffs at all the people putting min-size Emperor's Children formations in far less fluffy combinations, the bloody power gamers. Anyway, Iron Hands like vehicles, which is unusual amongst the Legions, as most Legion traits seem to punish you wanting to take an armoured company. So if you like tanks, use Iron Hands and they become a little more survivable against first fire, meaning anti-infantry Iron Hands tanks are the direct counter to big blops of first firing fist infantry. I guess because paper beats rock. I don't know, it was midnight when I wrote that, but it kind of works. Your HQ's detachment, Feel No Pain, also gets a little bit better, though you won't have one of those in an armoured company. So you can make a fun, fluffy double act with a small crew of Emperor's Children and a big block of Iron Warriors tanks, but that's noticeably missing infantry. So where to get those whilst being fluffy and not terrible? Well, for not terrible, take the Imperial Fists. Whilst they were never BFFs like the Emperor's Children and Hands were, they're still overwhelmingly Loyalist. For more fluffy, our next entry is... Now look, discussing allies is pointless here. If you're really choosing Ultramarines as your main in this, the year of our Lord 2024, it's because you actually like the Goody Shoe Shoes poster Smurfs and actually want to feel the Legion of Blue. And you know what? Fine. You do you. Someone needs to play as Mario in both Smash and Kart while having a live, laugh, love on their wall, and that's fine. You do that for the rest of us. But their trait, whilst being pretty rubbish, does reward every single model being blue. If one blue detachment wounds an enemy detachment with a blue gun, then the next blue detachment gets to hit that same one easier. So fill up a demi company with as many blue guns as you can manage and just do death by a million paper cuts. Go nuts. Enjoy your tiny blue legionaries. The downside is this punishes you for taking multiple formations, as only blue guns from the same formation count. So once you've maxed out a demi company, for confusion's sake more than anything else, it probably makes sense that nothing else on the table is blue. If you want tank support, take Iron Hands. If you want close combat support, take Blood Angels. If you want more infantry, take Imperial Fists. But to be honest, just take Imperial Fists instead of Ultramarines at that point. So, super fluffy, and the Cannon allies do support gaps in the army, but it's just not a great trait compared to some of the others. But it could be worse. You could be Space Wolves. 2 left, and now we have the Salamanders. And, as intimated, you can ally these guys with anyone and it'd be fluffy. There is absolutely no Legion who would refuse Salamander help if it were offered. They are Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce buying you a drink from across the bar because they like your vibe. So if you're taking Salamanders as your main, they're good for holding objectives due to their amazing morale, so you'll be looking at lots of green infantry on objectives. You'll absolutely want a minimum size Emperor's Children detachment for that initiative, and again, that fits the fluff. You could have a White Scars Phalanx if you want to use the Vanguard models, and again, they'd love it. Imperial Fist Bastions and Blood Angels aerial assaults would go down a storm. They even love the sneakiest of Ravengard and don't mind a bit of Alpha Legion. They are the least likely to F with the World Eaters, Death Guard and Thousand Suns, but to be honest there's no reason to want to take Thousand Suns with Salamanders game-wise, and the Blood Angels are as good and much fluffier a choice for combat than the World Eaters. Not having the opportunity for Death Guard-induced dangerous terrain nomination is a shame, but to be honest, if you were in the Death Guard and trying to find your keys because you'd locked yourself out and a Salamander walked past, he'd pay for a locksmith for you whilst also organising a search party to find them if it took him all night. Salamanders are a good legion with good traits and all the flexibility in the world with fluffy allies. Top of the pile. Our last Loyalist Legion numerically is the Ravengard. And whilst they're one of the few legions to play well with the Space Wolves, you probably wouldn't want to. They're both sort of anti-Alpha Legion style, Space Wolves with their aforementioned heightened senses, and Ravengard with their own deployment rules, with arguably even greater flexibility than the Alphas. Like the Ultramarines, you don't really want to mix Ravengard with others, as infantry, walkers, cavalry, and dedicated transports all gain movement shenanigans, ranging from infiltrate to forward deployment, meaning you can own the battlefield turn 1 with some good planning. This is of course perfectly in keeping with their fluff, but also renders drop pod assaults, aerial assaults, and armoured companies completely pointless with their rules. So if you fancied including those, then fluff would tend you towards Salamanders for drop pod and armoured assaults, and then take your pick of your favourite Loyalist Legion for close combat and aerial assaults. It seems silly to be playing Ravengard and then painting your Assault Marines red and running them as Blood Angels, but that's probably the better way to use them. So whilst their tactic is very fluffy, the fact it doesn't work great for jetpacks is a shame, but they play nice with all the Loyalist Legions, especially Salamanders, which is very useful, and Space Wolves, which is very not. But they also don't hate the Emperor's Children. If you want that initiative, just stay away from the other big traitor legions. There's a reason Endred Har spent so long covering up his World Eater livery before trying to hang out with the hot goths in the lunch hall. So, the Ravengard sit with the Ultramarines solidly in the middle tier of Loyalists. And there we have it. Every Loyalist Legion and how to use them to stay true to the fluff, whilst also making the most of their in-game traits and available allies. I hope this has been useful and interesting, and the traitors are next. Thank you as always to my Patreons. As the game settles in and the honeymoon period excitement wears off a little, so too have my Patreon numbers, which is super understandable. I'm astounded by the support I've received so far, so no worries there. But it does mean those of you who are still around in the chat and supporting the channel are just even more sexy than usual, and I am so ridiculously grateful to all of you, past and especially present and ongoing. I have a big pile of giveaways saved up with proceeds, including a full site Titan, so look forward to those as we hit the different celebration markers. I've just hit 2k as I was editing this video, so here's to the next 2k and beyond. Stay sexy everyone, peace and love, and as always, keep on lip bashing.